Marcus James Webb was 31 years old, and he moved through Detroit like a man trying not to take up too much air. He was not ugly, he was not stupid, he was not broken in any way a doctor could see or measure. But somewhere between the age of 9, when his third-grade teacher, Mrs. Calloway, told him his drawing of a horse looked like a dying dog. And now, standing in his kitchen at 6 a.m. in November 1974, Marcus had become very good at one thing above all others. He had become very good at disappearing. Not literally. He showed up to work every morning at the Ford River Rouge plant, punching the clock at 7 a.m. sharp, the smell of metal and machine oil filling his lungs like a familiar song. He worked his station without complaint. He ate lunch alone at the far table, the one near the broken heater that nobody else wanted. He did his job well, better than well, and he went home. Every single day he went home carrying something invisible and heavy, something he had no name for. His neighbor, old Ray Tillman, had a word for it. "You walking around like a man who already said sorry before anybody accused him of anything," Ray told him once from across the fence, sucking on a toothpick, eyes sharp under a gray flat cap. Marcus had laughed it off, but it stayed with him. It always stayed with him. Some people carry their wounds like luggage. Marcus had forgotten he was even holding it. Outside the plant walls, Detroit in 1974 was a city in the middle of its own identity crisis. The auto industry was stumbling. Neighborhoods that had buzzed with life a decade ago now had empty storefronts and broken streetlights. The music, Motown's golden sound, had already begun its slow migration to Los Angeles, as if even the music knew it was time to leave. But Marcus stayed. He always stayed. Leaving required believing you deserved somewhere better. It was a Tuesday in November when the envelope arrived, thin, cream-colored, with a return address from the Detroit City Planning Commission. Marcus almost threw it away. He had submitted a design, floor plans really, 6 months ago on a dare from Ray, who had seen Marcus sketching in his backyard one Saturday and said, "Boy, that's architecture. You know that, right?" Marcus had laughed. He was a line worker at Ford. He had no degree. He had taken one community college drafting course in 1968 and stopped after the instructor mispronounced his name 3 times in a row without correcting himself. That was enough. That was a sign. Marcus was good at reading signs that told him to stop, but Ray had pestered him for 2 weeks straight until Marcus mailed the plans. Community housing designs. Clean, practical, dignified. The kind of buildings that said to the people living inside them, "You matter." He had drawn them on his kitchen table over 3 sleepless weekends, and when he sealed the envelope, he felt something so unfamiliar it scared him. He felt proud. Then 6 months passed, nothing. Of course, nothing. What was he thinking? And so Marcus filed the whole embarrassing episode under the long list of things he would never speak of again, and went back to his station at the plant, and went back to his far table, and went back to disappearing until the envelope arrived. He held it for 11 minutes before opening it. His hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. Inside was a single typed letter. It was from a woman named Eleanor Price, Assistant Director of Community Development. She wrote that his designs had been reviewed by a panel of 3 architects and 2 city planners. She wrote that the panel had used words like remarkable and human-centered, and unlike anything submitted by professional firms. She wrote that the city would like to meet with him. Marcus read the letter 4 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the kitchen drawer under the phone book, and made himself a bologna sandwich. He did not call Eleanor Price that day, or the next. He had 7 days to respond. On the 5th night, Marcus could not sleep. He lay in the dark listening to the radiator knock and hiss, watching the shadows of passing cars sweep across his ceiling like something restless. At 2 a.m., he got up, pulled on his coat over his undershirt, and walked. Detroit at 2 a.m. in November was cold and quiet in the particular way of cities that have known grief. He walked past the closed diner on Livernois, past the barber shop where men had argued about Muhammad Ali and Vietnam and Nixon for years, past the church where his mother had taken him as a boy and told him God didn't make anything by accident. He ended up at the construction site on Woodward Avenue, a half-finished apartment complex that had stalled for months, tarps flapping in the cold wind, concrete bones standing naked against the dark sky. He stood there looking up at it, and something cracked open inside him, because he knew, in the way a man knows things he has spent years pretending not to know, that he could have designed something better than what stood in front of him. Not because he was arrogant, because it was simply true. He could see it so clearly. The way the windows should face southeast for morning light. The way the lobby should open wide and bright so people didn't feel like they were walking into a cave. The way a building could say welcome without a single word. Standing in the cold, Marcus finally asked himself the question he had been running from his whole life. What if I am actually worth something? The question did not feel triumphant. It felt terrifying. Because if the answer was yes, if he was worth something, then every year he had spent making himself small was not humility. It was waste. It was a kind of slow theft he had been committing against himself. Every ignored talent, every swallowed idea, every time he had laughed and said, "Nah, I'm just a factory man," all of it had been a lie. He stood in the freezing November wind for a long time. Long enough for his fingers to go numb. Long enough to feel the full weight of 31 years pressing down on him. And then he turned around and walked home. On the 6th day, Marcus opened the kitchen drawer. He unfolded the letter. He read it one more time. Then he picked up the phone. Eleanor Price answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was businesslike, efficient. Marcus introduced himself. There was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. And then her voice changed, warmed. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I was hoping you would call." The conversation lasted 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, Marcus did something he had never done in his adult life. He did not apologize for himself. He did not shrink his words or make his voice smaller. He answered her questions directly, and when she asked why he had waited so long to call, he said simply, "I had to decide something first." "What did you decide?" she asked. Marcus looked out his kitchen window at the gray Detroit sky. "That I'm worth the meeting," he said. There was a pause on the line. Then Eleanor Price said something Marcus would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Mr. Webb," she said quietly, "you were worth it long before you decided that." Marcus Webb went to that meeting. He went to several more after that. The city did not hand him a miracle. Nothing works that cleanly in real life. And the 1970s were not a decade of clean miracles. There were obstacles, setbacks, forms that got lost, budgets that were cut, rooms where Marcus was the only man who looked like him. But he kept going, because the decision he had made at 2 a.m. in front of that unfinished building on Woodward Avenue was not a one-time choice. It was a practice. Every day he chose to believe that his presence mattered. Every day he chose not to disappear. By 1979, 2 of his housing designs had been built in Detroit's East Side. They were not famous buildings. Architecture magazines did not write about them. But the people who lived in them noticed something they could not quite explain. A feeling of being considered, of being respected by the very walls around them. Because Marcus had designed them that way, he had built his own sense of worth right into the concrete. You cannot give the world what you refuse to believe you have. This is the thing about valuing yourself that nobody warns you about. It is not a feeling that arrives one morning like sunlight. It is a decision you make in the dark, when you are cold, when you are unsure, when every old voice in your head is telling you to put the letter back in the drawer. It is the choice to pick up the phone anyway, to walk into the room anyway, to say without apology, "I am worth this." Marcus was not special because he was talented. Talent alone never saved anyone. Marcus was special because one November night in 1974, standing in the freezing dark in Detroit, Michigan, he decided, for the first time in his life, to stop being his own worst enemy, to stop disappearing, to let himself be seen. Nobody noticed when Marcus stopped raising his hand. but the whole world noticed when he finally did. Your letter is waiting in the drawer. How many days will you let it sit?